Today's conference about race, religion, rhetoric, and far-right extremism was driven in part by last summer's racist riots. The need for us as faith communities to come together and find a way of addressing the increased polarization and social erosion that is taking place in Britain, given its increased superdiversity. It's important for us to realize that as faith communities, we have a specific call, a mandate to speak into this area, because all of the great faiths, including Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, follow the tenet that it is important to love our neighbors as ourselves.
The far right today operates within a global network of ideas, networks, and technologies that transcend borders, making this a challenge that cannot be addressed in isolation. The UK has long prided itself on being a multicultural society, enriched by generations of migration and shaped by its colonial past. However, this history has also been marked by deep tensions, from Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech, to the Brexit debates of recent years. Race and religion have been weaponized to divide communities and stoke fear. More recently, we have witnessed the mainstreaming of far-right rhetoric in public discourse. Politicians and media outlets have deployed terms like invasion to describe refugees, culture wars to dismiss legitimate concerns about racism, woke as a pejorative for social progress. These are not just words. They shape policies, influence elections, and in the most extreme cases, inspire acts of violence. The far right has evolved. Where once we saw street-based movements like the National Front, today we see a digital-first radicalization process where conspiracy theories spread online faster than ever. From white nationalist influencers on YouTube to Telegram channels spreading misinformation, online spaces have become battlegrounds for ideological warfare. But far-right extremism does not operate in isolation. It is part of a transnational network where ideas, tactics, and even funding flow across borders.
This issue of far-right extremism and the many different ways in which it's threatening our communities is a major concern to the whole church. It's been a recurring theme in our ecumenical dialogues where we're bringing together Christians of different denominations, and particularly so after the riots of August last year, which impacted communities across different places in Britain and Ireland where we work.
The far right of British politics is found in a wide variety of forms. Absolutely, that's not a complete list of organisations, ranging from now banned organisations such as the neo-Nazi group National Action to elements within mainstream politics. And our terminology is tricky. One of the leading specialists on far-right movements, Kaz Mudder, defines the far right as being hostile to liberal democracy. And he then divides that into two groups. The extreme right, as he uses the term, rejects the essence of democracy, that is, popular sovereignty and majority rule. And classic examples of such extreme right movements would be those led by Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini. By contrast, what he terms the radical right accepts the essence of democracy but opposes fundamental elements of liberal democracy, most notably minority rights, rule of law, and separation of powers. Now, happily, the most extreme elements of that ideology are struggling to gain purchase in the UK at present, although they are absolutely not absent, and we must not be complacent. As we've seen, many countries in the rest of Europe and beyond have not proved so immune. Within the UK, forms of the far-right movement that are growing in influence and plausibility are the more mainstream ones. The 2024 report by Hope Not Hate plots a significant advance even within the previous 12 months, both within fringe political movements and within the Conservative Party itself, as well as in popular news outlets such as GB News. The mainstreaming of far-right discourse makes it more acceptable and more electable and, as we shall see shortly, more plausible to the church.
In Hungary, Viktor Orban has positioned himself as the defender of Christianity against a dangerous influx of Islam arriving with refugees from the Middle East. He says, "The masses arriving from other civilizations endanger our way of life, our culture, our customs, and our Christian traditions." As the influence of this Christian nationalism has grown across Europe, the Christian faith has been used as an excuse for resisting migrancy, sometimes violently.
Here are some more recent screen grabs from social media selected to show the tight association in many American minds between patriotism and God. And this one makes what I would consider a blasphemous association between the sacrificial love of Jesus Christ crucified, the American flag, and the gun.
Back to the UK. In the lead up to the 2015 general election, the UK Independence Party published what they called a Christian manifesto, headed with the title Valuing Our Christian Heritage. In its foreword, the party's then leader, Nigel Farage, wrote, "Britain needs a much more muscular defence of our Christian heritage and our Christian constitution. In parts of the British Church, a much more muscular defence of our Christian heritage is exactly what we seem to be getting." On the 5th of April last year, which was during Ramadan, Bristol Cathedral hosted a grand iftar, inviting any citizen who wished to join with local Muslims as they broke their fast after sunset. Large crowds gathered on College Green just outside the cathedral, and also in the building itself. We've seen no suggestion that any act of worship was conducted. Video footage from the event simply shows people, many but not all in Muslim dress, enjoying food together, with children playing alongside their families. Commentators immediately took to their microphones and keyboards to denounce this. One of them is an ordained priest who is a prominent influencer with over 330,000 followers on Twitter. He took it as a sign that we are now living in the Islamic Caliphate of Britain. That particular Twitter thread attracted over 6,000 readers, with many people chipping in to call for defence of our land, exorcism of the cathedral, and most disturbingly, for crusade.
I had the opportunity to lead the workshop on the response of the church to these issues. I was really encouraged by the diversity of experiences and expertise in the room. We looked at the problem of far-right extremism and the threats that it presents from different angles, from the socioeconomic to the pressures on community relations, to the spiritual dimension of the problem, and we considered the different ways in which the church might respond. We talked about how to build confidence across the church so that more Christians are speaking out about their values and how we're called to bring people together in this time of division and polarization. We talked about how we might engage better with political leadership, and we talked about communications and how we might better communicate our values through the media and especially through social media.
The task that Guy set me when he asked me to come along to this important gathering was really to look at the role of government in strengthening social cohesion and ensuring the safety of citizens. And I'm always happy to talk about that. I've been police minister. I've been various things. I've been chief secretary. I've done various things in government that have a direct bearing on that. But I thought I'd try something out. I'm trying to get with it, to absorb all that dominates in these times. So I thought I would ask that question of artificial intelligence, of AI. Yeah, clearly there's quite some old people in this audience who seem to be somewhat taken. But I mean, that's what they do these days. So I put it in, and this is what came out. A government plays a crucial role in promoting social cohesion by creating policies and initiatives that foster equality, inclusivity, and a sense of belonging across diverse communities. There, you heard it from AI. They then go on to tell you key aspects of a government's role in social cohesion: policy development, investment in community programs promoting civic engagement, addressing systemic inequalities, interfaith dialogue and cultural awareness, you'll be glad to hear, monitoring and evaluation, collaboration with civil society. And then he gives some examples of government actions to promote social cohesion. All well and good. All actually quite useful. And if you were doing A-level politics, I would have thought extremely useful in terms of your essays. But the reality is this is indeed what government should be doing. But it isn't what government is doing. It isn't what really any government can simply be relied upon to do. And it's not that they don't know what to do, and I'll come to that in a moment. But one of the things I have learned over the years, and Simon and I the other day were at a memorial service in Bristol, in the cathedral in Bristol, and you know, I referred there when we were looking at Paul Stevenson's life to the dictum of Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist. Interestingly, a man who, at the turn of the 19th century, was one of the most photographed men in the world. And there's this incredible picture. And if you've seen it, of Frederick Douglass, powerful black visage and white beard. And he said this: "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will." So government has the power to promote social cohesion. Government has the power and the duty to ensure the safety of citizens. But it is not going to happen unless the demand is made. And that, it seems to me, is where this conference and where you all, coming from where you're coming from and in the organizations in which you are embedded and key movers and shakers, that's where you come in. Because the demand has to be made of government, first and foremost. It is important that we do talk about government. At the end of the day, the government's role is enabling. Government's role is to create a permissive environment for changes that have to occur, for programs that have to be delivered, and that permissiveness is partly an issue of funding, as well as creating the policy space. But at the end of the day, without the active engagement of communities, believe you me, it is not going to happen.
How should the followers of Jesus respond to this phenomenon? Among the many things we Christians need to do is to develop a theology of advocacy. Jesus, we note, begins his formal ministry by announcing his commitment to the poor, freedom for the prisoners, and recovery of sight for the blind. He fulfills these words through acts of healing, teaching, and sacrifice, ultimately dying for the world. With Jesus' entry into the world, a clear picture of God's advocacy comes into sharp focus, one that helps us appreciate the extent that God goes to advocate with and on behalf of others. He will not just advocate for them, but with them. Jesus walks into the facets of the world and reorients the structures for their true purpose. He stands before economic systems, family units, land and agriculture, and brings them under his lordship. Jesus's repeated use of the word kingdom implies socio-political implications, as if to say salvation must not just attend to the personal matters, but a broader context. Thus, the New Testament word kingdom describes God's commitment and transformation of all things, including the political terrain.
You brought us together to look at religion, to look at race, to look at the far right extremism. I might argue that we should not be overly worried about the far right. And let me explain, because you're thinking, really, Simon? I would argue that we should be more concerned about the normalization of hate-filled mainstream politics. You see where I'm going with this? Mainstream, not on the fringes anymore. I would argue it's time for us to summon some strength that our ancestors will have given us to do what we need to do. We've seen people afraid of Trump and his henchmen, kowtowing, scared. And then we see a ray of hope when one of your own, a bishop from Washington, D.C., when all these scaredy cats were kowtowing, she turned round and spoke truth to power. Mr. President, she said, I implore you to show mercy to the most vulnerable people in this country who are scared because of you. At risk to her life, she spoke truth to power. Anybody asks you what allyship looks like, show them the video. Show them what needs to be done. Show them what needs to be said. And so it comes back to you. It comes back to us today. What's our role? What's our role in this? Are we just going to lament about the wretchedness that we see? Or are we going to use the space to organize in a way where we are refuting being triggered, but are empowered about what we can do? Power concedes nothing without demands. What demands are we making? I would say, when you think about the churches, when you think about the Christians in this country, some 24 million, when you think about the 20,000 clergy, men and women, what should our ask be to them? Yes, you can have 12 commandments that you have done, but to me, there's a couple of things that are missing from it. Power. How do we give our communities power?
Out of our discussions, I have distilled 10 concrete recommendations for the UK Church, which you have a copy of on your tables. And I'm pleased to just go through those briefly today now. First of all, the Church must own up to, rather than try to conceal, our own historic and indeed our contemporary complicity with racism, homophobia, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. We need to be honest about the times we've got it badly wrong, and we need to notice the ways that our scripture can seem to promote such ideologies when incautiously or cynically interpreted. And so we should take care in the pulpit, for example, that we don't unwittingly collude with those ideas. This sort of humble, cautious and non-defensive stance is a vital first step towards cultivating a faithful and useful response to the problem. Second, we need to speak publicly to disavow any violence done in the name of Christ, particularly at senior denominational level. Thirdly, the Church should be wary of reinforcing far-right stereotypes of Muslim illiberality, which it may unwittingly do by positioning itself as the primary upholder of democratic dialogue. Sometimes the urge to stand in neutrality and to hold open spaces where all people of goodwill can meet to dialogue, good as that impulse is, and valuable, I think, as that action is, can implicitly position the Church as the prime upholder of democratic values, and position others, such as Muslims, as beneficiaries of that at best, or worse, as threats.
Emerging from an extended discussion of the parable of the Good Samaritan, we explored the idea of dialoguing with the bandits. Many of us will have the commendable instinct to dialogue with those on the far right, to try and persuade them to more moderate ways of thinking. When convening dialogues, we need to be sure to agree rules of engagement in advance, and then actually enforcing them. And we need to model the virtue of healthy disagreement and train our congregation in these virtues. It helps nobody if we become like those we oppose, mirroring their violent rhetoric with our own. It is important to remember that the task of de-radicalisation also is a specialist role, like medical care or specialist counselling. It does not fall within the remit or skill set of most ministers. We need to seek and propagate rich and nuanced understandings of the causes of far-right movements and avoid demonising certain demographic groups as pervasively racist. For example, it is increasingly clear that many of the people engaged in extreme right movements at the moment are wealthy, hedge fund managers and stockbrokers and the like. There is plenty of dark money funding these movements, and it's not all coming from council estates. At the same time, we need to be more attentive to the factors which can drive far-right ideology among deprived groups, and view that problem as an issue of structural injustice rather than sinful bigotry. People within the Church who mobilise on these issues are frequently from the so-called metropolitan elite, those who have been educated at university level and are politically liberal and enjoy modest affluence. As a result, the Church sometimes talks down to working class people, lecturing them on their bigotry without understanding the root causes of their opinions.
We also need to avoid reinforcing the divisions between natives and immigrants by casting hardship relief as a zero-sum game. Our challenge is to find the ways of ministering to the hardships of all simultaneously. No one can fairly accuse the British Church of being indifferent on matters of food poverty, fuel poverty, human trafficking, refugees, and so on. But projects working primarily for the relief of what we might call traditional communities, and those working for the benefit of asylum seekers and immigrants and so on, have tended to be managed by separate interest groups within the Church, interest groups which may have to pit their priorities against one another in order to seek funding and support. We need to find ways of joining up these equally valid concerns so that they're not in competition with each other. We also need to facilitate the theological equipping and start listening to Christian believers who live and operate within situations of marginalisation in the UK. Bluntly, we need to stop talking down to people. We should attend to the rising problem of youth radicalisation by investing in youth work and youth programmes, especially those which enhance dialogue across religious and cultural boundaries. We should also train our young people in critical thinking and model these virtues in public and private conversation. As part of my own research into this issue, I attended a conference where I heard testimony from two what's known as formers, people who had formerly been violent members of these radical movements. The striking thing was that both of those interviewed men had been radicalised in their teens, and neither of them had initially had deep right-wing convictions. They were drawn into these movements because they encountered a group who showed them respect and affection and community. And I was left wondering what might have happened if they'd found a thriving church youth group instead. And I'll just mention on your tables, you've got information about a conference we're running on this exact question a week today.
Theological education also matters. Now, we know there are many pressures on ministerial formation. Whereas once aspiring clergy were trained in biblical languages, scriptures, and patristic theology, now an enormous range of concerns press upon us. Rightly, we now provide space in our formation programs for safeguarding training, leading change, pastoral counselling, pioneering, and 1,000 other things. But if we are tempted to water down the theological and biblical training of ministers and priests, we do so at great risk. This is one of the challenges that most, if not all, theological colleges are facing in the current UK climate, where previous funding models are falling out of favour and where the much-quoted line, "we've had enough of experts," is finding approval in parts of the church. But there is clear evidence that those in our congregations who are regularly exposed to faithful, well-developed biblical teaching are less likely to show signs of radicalisation and violence. And as we have already discussed, the true and good biblical themes, which can be misapplied and misunderstood to great harm, require wise and responsible handling by people who have deep roots in the scriptural and theological traditions of our faith. We should also seek to be faithful to the calling of the church, learning to express radical love and welcome, and conversely to stand against hatred and divisiveness in creative, non-violent ways. Ultimately, this is not a problem that can be solved with a set of practical suggestions. It is a spiritual problem which will only be addressed by spiritual means. The church has a prophetic calling. It is called to bear witness to the teachings of Jesus Christ by word and deed. We are to witness in speech and action to the peaceful, just, and holy world that God is inaugurating.
And finally, I suggest that we need to notice the particular gifts which the various ecclesial traditions can bring to the struggle. I'll speak for a moment from my own position as a nonconformist, specifically as a Baptist minister, because I believe that we have a particular perspective to offer to this problem. It's not the only perspective, it's not the only gift, but it's our particular one. The dissenting tradition contains a long history of trying to avoid being co-opted to systems of power, and the deep principle of shunning positions of political privilege, at least as institution, if not as individuals. We might usefully draw upon these memories. Those of us who are in this tradition would do well to rediscover our history and tell it afresh to a new generation. Religious freedom, the celebration of multiculturalism, ministry from the edge to the edge, criticising the powerful, not the weak. These are all deeply Baptist themes, and those of us who are from the dissenting churches would do well to rediscover this tradition and offer it as our gift to the struggle.
But what does Catholicism, and in particular Catholic social teaching, have to offer this problem? Catholic social teaching can guide us as we seek to determine the best way to respond. It firmly resists the extremes of behaviours that right-wing and nationalist politics promote, although I'm not saying that we don't have a problem in our own church, we do. Instead, in its purest form, it focuses on the dignity of the human person, the fact that we are all made in the image and likeness of God. Therefore, to hate or other a human being is to hate or other God, in whose likeness or image we are made. Fundamentally, CST teaches us that we must care for the most vulnerable in our societies, and when thinking about far-right extremism, this has two consequences for us. First, we must care for the strangers in our midst, those that the far-right seek to vilify and banish. But second, we must also seek to understand why people are becoming radicalised. What is it in our society that makes them vulnerable to such exploitation? This may seem counterintuitive, to care for those who spend their time hurting others, but as well as offering fraternal correction to them, we must also seek to deal with the problems such as poverty and marginalisation that make them susceptible to radicalisation.
Jesus said, as I'm sure most of you know, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, but when it has grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. This fundamental truth is often overlooked by those who seek to employ power for their own theological agenda. And that applies both to those who are promoting the ideologies of the far right and to many who seek to counter them. It is not by force or coercion that the kingdom of God grows, and it is not by force or coercion that positive change will be realised. We cannot challenge the authoritarian tendencies in ideologies that we hate by ourselves employing heavy-handed top-down measures that belittle, deplatform, or intimidate. But the scripture teaches that change is possible when it is prayed in by the faithful, whispered in by the Spirit, and patiently nurtured by the church. Patience is required for the necessary work of shaping the hearts and minds of future ministers by the process of theological education. Patience is needed for the nurturing of generous, open-hearted young people who are secure in their own faith and warm towards those who do not share it or whose culture is different from their own. The week-by-week formation of the character of God's people through the faithful preaching and exposition of God's word is a slow, patient business too. By patience and through small things, we believe that this is how the kingdom goes and this is how the kingdom grows. And we have confidence that God, by his Spirit, continues to breathe his life into the church, that he is still calling to be a prophetic presence in the world. Thank you.